We're pleased to have a speaker we have every single year, Dr. Daniel C. Peterson. He's a native of Southern California. He has a bachelor's degree in Greek and philosophy from Brigham Young University, and after several years studying Jerusalem and Cairo, earned his PhD in Near Eastern Languages and Cultures from the University of California in Los Angeles. He's a professor of Islamic Studies and Arabic at BYU, and he has a lot more things in his bio. But with that short intro, I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. Peterson.
Imagination has the shape of a large rock in the middle of a river against which we are thrown, and we have to go one way or the other. Its claims are so audacious, its text is so massive and complex and convoluted.
If we think that there's a God who intervenes in human lives, then all kinds of things become much more plausible than they were before.
Why would the Lord pick somebody like Martin Harris or Oliver Cowdery or David Whitmer to be witnesses, to see the angel, to see the plates and their engravings, to hear the voice of God from heaven declaring that they're true?
We can't access the experience of other individuals directly.
I think he was a very good storyteller. You can interpret that in a lot of ways.
Well, they don't think that they were deceived. They think that Joseph falls away from his prophetic mission and leadership.
If there was a conspiracy, Oliver Cowdery was in on it. He was part of it. He was the co-conspirator.
Oliver, you're incredible. He's the second elder of the church. He becomes an assistant to the first presidency. And then you say, Oliver, what happened?
I would argue both that he believed what he was saying and that there were no ancient golden plates in the archaeological sense of, plates that were hundreds or thousands of years old.
In order to make them disappear, you have to erase all this evidence of a variety of people feeling them, touching them, observing where they were, and just forget all that.
Critics today are starting to say that it was just, quote, spiritualized, and that they really didn't see anything. And perhaps they even hallucinated about this. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Well, as you can tell, this is a project that I'm involved in and that has occupied a lot of my time recently, and so the witnesses are very, very much on my mind. And so I'm going to be talking about the witness of women today, particularly, as just part of this, because one of the commitments that I've made, one of the things that I've insisted on is this project that we're working on will pay attention to the unofficial witnesses to the Book of Mormon as well as to the official 11. So today I'll talk about the women. And let's start with the biblical origin of the gender. See if I can make this work. Okay. And the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an help meet for him. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam, to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found an help meet for him." That's from Genesis, of course. Now, one of the things that's given rise to in the church is a folk expression, helpmeet. Now, I have to confess, this is one of my pet peeves. I really hate the term helpmeet because it doesn't make any sense. And so we sometimes correct it to helpmate, which makes a little more sense. But when it's talking about making a helpmeet for Adam, it's talking about making a help suitable for Adam. The scriptures also talk about bringing forth fruits, meat for repentance, but we don't talk about fruit meats. At least I don't think we do. So this is how it probably should read. This is an English Standard Version. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." The NIV, a helper suitable for him. The Septuagint, a helper according to him. Boethon katauton. It means according to his nature. You remember that what happens right after this is there's a parade of animals, or what happened, well, I just described it, is there's a parade of animals brought before Adam, and he looks at all of them, and he comes up with names for them, but, the giraffes, the dinosaurs, none of them quite fit. They're not the help suited for Adam. And so that's when the woman is created. The man gave names to all livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field, but for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. An adjutor similus eius, similar to him, the Vulgate says. And then Eve is created because she is suitable for him. You see here what I call the parade of the animals. But the woman is not among them. She has to be specially created, especially suited to Adam and fit to be with him. But then, of course, Eve's arrival signals some other changes. And here you see the expulsion from the garden. And I'm going to recite a little minor poem from A.E. Houseman. I didn't clear this with my wife. I recited this to her before we were married. And still we got married. And this isn't as funny today as it would be because, and I take this seriously. Look, it's the Me Too moment, and spouse abuse is not exactly in, if it ever was. A.E. Houseman, by the way, never married, so he didn't actually do this. But here's a little piece of poetry that didn't make it into his collected works. It's in a letter to his brother. When Adam day by day woke up in paradise, he always used to say, "Oh, this is very nice." But Eve, from scenes of bliss, transported him for life. The more I think of this, the more I beat my wife. Anyway, okay. So, you remember the story. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened. Now, importantly, the first step is taken by the woman, and the woman is punished. And the way in which she's punished is interesting. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Or as the English Standard Version puts it, to the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. Now, there's a long and dishonorable history that's followed from this, which is a legacy in too many cases of submission and very often of oppression of women. And that will play a role in the story that I'm going to try to tell now. But I'm going to jump far forward in scriptural history and talk about another important case where a woman plays a crucial role. The Annunciation and the birth of Jesus. And in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God into a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin whose name was Mary. And then you have this story a little bit later on. Mary here is the first who knows that a new dispensation is beginning. Something really, really important is about to happen, that the Christ will be born. And then after all the spectacular events, the shepherds and so on, all they that heard it wondered at those things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. Mary plays a really crucial role in this story. And Luke probably interviewed her or interviewed people who knew her, because it's quite clear, many points, he's talking about how she responded, how she reacted. She's not showing outward signs of it. She keeps these things and ponders them in her heart. So she's not just a passive observer. She's someone who actually knows, before the men know in many cases, what's about to happen. Now, that is not the main focus of what I'm going to say. I'm just trying to set up the case. The first principal case I want to look at, where women are pivotal witnesses to the story of the gospel, the unfolding of the gospel, is the testimony of the women at the tomb of Jesus. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And I guess I should be keeping up with the pictures. I'm getting into my text too much and forgetting. There's the Annunciation, and then the first image of the woman at the tomb. Okay, so when they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen. Remember how he told you, while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise. And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Or as the King James puts it, and their words seemed to them as idle tales, and they believed them not. Leros tahremata, nonsense, the NIV says. Madness, the Wycliffe Bible says. Sheer imagination, J.B. Phillips. A fairy tale, the Living Bible. Idle talk and nonsense, the Amplified Bible. The Message, but the apostles didn't believe a word of it. They thought they were making it all up. Okay. Now, we'll come back to that concept in a minute. Here's another story connected with the resurrection of Christ and his post-resurrection appearances. Mary Magdalene saw Jesus standing and knew not that it was Jesus. You remember this story. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? And she, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou hast borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself and saith unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brethren, and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. Now, that's an interesting passage, and you see the image that it's given rise to. This is a particularly clear example. She has this yearning look on her face. She's wanting to touch him, and he's waving her off. Stay back. Don't touch me. But that, I submit to you, is not the way this passage should be read. The NIV and the NRSV translate this as, do not hold on to me. It's a little different scene. Halte mich nicht fest, say several German translations. Don't hold me fast. Hold me not, says the JST, which gets it right. Very clearly gets it right here. The me muhaptu of the Greek is in the present imperative tense. Present tense is used for expressing continued action. So this is a prohibition, or stop touching me. A prohibition in the present imperative demands that an action already in progress be stopped. So she is touching him, okay? But a better translation still of that verb is not just touch. She's not reaching out her index finger just to touch, say, are you real, or something like that. No, here's another translation of it. Stop touching, stop holding on to, stop grasping me. The verb can have the meaning of adhering to something, okay? So my image of this is something like what the NASB translation says, stop clinging to me. Very, very different. She has thrown herself at him, and you can imagine this emotional scene. She is so astonished to see someone that she's loved and venerated and so on, who is alive after being clearly dead. She saw him on the cross. He was dead in a horrible way. She has thrown herself on him, and he's trying to peel her off, basically, and saying, look, I can't stay. You know, I'm not back permanently. Stop holding on to me. Stop grabbing me like that. You've got to let me go. I'm going to my Father and your Father, and so on. So at a crucial scene here, it's women who bear testimony. Women who are the first witnesses. Women who bear, in a sense, the first apostolic testimony of the resurrection of Christ. Okay? We've been hearing before about how women share priesthood responsibilities in some ways with men. Here they are holding almost an apostolic role, if you will. It's their testimony that comes first. Now, the ancient world was not fond of the testimony of women. And to illustrate that, I'm going to make a point from a text that doesn't belong to the New Testament. And some of you may say, well, but of course we'd expect it from this culture. Here's the second surah of the Quran. O you who have believed. It's a 7th century Middle Eastern text, so it still kind of illustrates my point. O you who have believed, when you have contracted a debt for a fixed term, write it down. Let a scribe write it down between you in justice, and let no scribe refuse to write it down, as God has taught him to do. So let him write, and let the one who has the right to do so dictate. Let him fear God, his Lord, and omit nothing. And if the one who has the right is feeble of intellect, or weak, or unable to dictate himself, let his guardian dictate in justice, and take as evidence 2 witnesses from among your men. But if there are not 2 men, take a man and 2 women from those who are acceptable as witnesses, so that if one of the women errs, the other can remind her. Now that is plainly sexist, right? 2 men, or, 1 man and 2 women's, because the women are kind of flighty and so on and so forth. Women had no legal status. Their testimony was inadmissible in court, not only among Muslims, but earlier in 1st century Judaism. But let not the testimony of women be admitted on account of the levity and boldness of their sex. This is from Flavius Josephus. Women were put in the same category as slaves who were not allowed to testify due to the ignobility of their soul. Marketplaces and council chambers and courts of justice and large companies and assemblies of numerous crowds and a life in the open air full of arguments and actions relating to war and peace are suited to men, but taking care of the house and remaining at home are the proper duties of women. The virgins having their apartments in the center of the house within the innermost doors, and the full-grown women not going beyond the vestibule and outer courts. That's Philo Judaeus, both of these from the 1st century. The Talmud took its final form probably in the 400s, although it commenced in the 200s, and it says, any evidence which a woman gives is not valid to offer. This is equivalent to saying that one who is rabbinically accounted a robber is qualified to give the same evidence as a woman. And then it says, the Tanaim, taught us an unattributed Mishnah here, as we learned in Mishnah such and such. These people are disqualified from bearing witness as they are considered wicked and guilty of monetary transgressions. One who plays with dice, those who lend money with interest, those who fly pigeons, and merchants who trade in produce of the sabbatical year. And Canaanite slaves are disqualified. This is the principle. For any testimony for which a woman is not fit, these 2 are not fit. Okay? Although in certain cases a woman's testimony is accepted. For example, testimony concerning the death of someone's husband. It's good, nice. The woman can testify, my husband's dead, right? In most cases, her testimony is not valid. All right? Sir John Polkinghorne, who's a very noted British physicist and Anglican priest, fellow of the Royal Society, says this: perhaps the strongest reason for taking the stories of the empty tomb absolutely seriously lies in the fact that it is women who play the leading role. It would have been very unlikely for anyone in the ancient world who was concocting a story to assign the principal part to women, since in those times they were not considered capable of being reliable witnesses in a court of law. It is surely much more probable that they appear in the gospel accounts precisely because they actually fulfilled the role that the stories assigned to them. And in so doing, they make a startling discovery. Okay, the point here is this is actually an argument for the credibility of the story, because had the author simply been inventing a fictional story, he wouldn't have chosen women. He would have, chosen somebody else, somebody respectable, like a man. And you see that really clearly in Paul's formulation of the evidence for the resurrection. You remember Paul's recitation of the witnesses in 1 Corinthians 15, a chapter that we often look to for baptism for the dead and doctrine about the resurrection. But he starts the chapter off this way in verse 3, chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians. I delivered unto you first of all that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. See if I can get to Paul. Oops, there's women at the tomb. I'm behind. Anyway, there's Paul. And he was buried. He rose again the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. And he was seen of Cephas, or Peter, then of the 12. After that he was seen of above 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some have fallen asleep. And after that he was seen of James, then of all the apostles. And last of all he was seen of me also, as of one born out of due time. For I am the least of the apostles, that am not meet to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am. Now that's a really impressive list. You've got various mentions of the apostles, 500 brethren who saw him and so on, or saw Christ, the resurrected Christ. But who's missing from the list? The women aren't there. Paul was a trained Pharisaic lawyer, right? And by the standards of his day, they didn't count. So he leaves them out. It's all men, all of his witnesses. So at this pivotal moment, one of the most important moments in the history of the Gospels, the history of humankind, the resurrection of Christ, the crucial witnesses in many ways, the first witnesses, are women. But there's a prejudice against allowing them to testify formally. Now I'm just going to kind of take a detour here, a seeming detour, just as I began throwing this together. There were a couple of other women whose witnesses, even though they're not Latter-day Saints and not in the Scriptures, appealed to me and I wanted to mention them. One is Juliana of Norwich in England. She was an English anchorite who died very early in the 15th century. The earliest surviving book in the English language to be written by a woman is by her. It's called The Revelations of Divine Love. And the classic line from that is her sense, above all the doctrinal things and so on, that everything is going to be okay with the gospel. And this is what she writes: all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. That's the concluding line of her book. It's like the end of the hymn, Come, Come Ye Saints, right? That for the faithful, everything in the end will turn out all right. And I'm going to surprise you maybe with another choice. This is not going to be the burden of these remarks, but while I was thinking about women and their witnesses, I thought about this one, St. Joan of Arc. In the early 15th century, late in the Hundred Years' War, Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc, claimed to have received visions of the Archangel Michael, St. Margaret, and St. Catherine of Alexandria, telling her to support the as yet uncrowned Charles VII of France, and thereby free France from English domination. Now, I'd always thought this was a nice story until I saw a play at BYU written by Melissa Leilani Larson called Angels Unaware, a story of Joan of Arc in 2006, in which she took those angels as serious, from a Latter-day Saint perspective, post-death, post-mortem people, the real St. Catherine of Alexandria and so on, who've been called upon to help this French girl and make things work for her. And I thought, could this story be true? I mean, God does things that we don't always know about. Could this be a true story of angelic intervention on behalf of this French girl? Let me tell you who was really impressed by her. There's a young boy by the name of Coley Taylor who told this story late in his life. He approached the aged Mark Twain one day after noticing the author, very famous, standing alone on a stone bridge in Redding, Connecticut. Twain was a familiar figure around the town, and young Coley had always wanted to talk to him, to express his admiration for him. I was glad, he says, that he was alone. He wrote an article about this. I had wanted to tell him how much I had enjoyed Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. But Twain's response to the young boy was shocking. I'd never seen him so cross. I can see him yet, shaking that long forefinger at me, Taylor recalled. You shouldn't read those books about bad boys, Twain scolded him. Now listen to what an old man tells you. My best book is my recollection of Joan of Arc. This is his last novel. You're too young to understand and enjoy it now, but read it when you're older. Remember then what I tell you now. Joan of Arc is my very best book. Now, most literary critics have not agreed with him, but he made that same comment in other settings. I like Joan of Arc best of all my books, he wrote shortly before his death. It is the best. I know it perfectly well. Besides, it furnished me 7 times the pleasure afforded me by any of the others. 12 years of preparation, 2 years of writing. The others needed no preparation and got none. Now, this is very odd. I mean, she was a visionary. He was a notorious religious skeptic, very likely an atheist. His background was Protestant, anti-Catholic, and he hated the French, couldn't stand them. She was French, died a Catholic martyr, and in 1920 became a Catholic saint. But he was really, really impressed with her story. And if anything tempted him to abandon his religious cynicism, I think it was Joan of Arc. In his epigraph to the novel, Twain describes St. Joan as, quote, the only person of either sex who's ever held supreme command of the military forces of a nation at the age of 17, end quote. It's a pretty remarkable story, however you look at it. Now, Twain was almost certainly unaware of the prophet Mormon. Mormon had become the leader of his people's armies in his 16th year, that is at 15, almost certainly because of his lineage, and like St. Joan, because of his religious stature. Okay. Now, I think we're missing one here. Are we missing one? Yep. Okay, well, that'll have to do it. All right. I want to talk about women's testimony in America. This is where I'm coming to my real theme. The great 18th century English barrister and jurist Sir William Blackstone, you see his commentaries of the laws of England here that Abraham Lincoln studied by firelight to become a lawyer, right? Classic book. Was a major proponent of the idea of women's exclusion from jury service, propter defectum sexus, that is, based on the defect of sex. It's the same attitude. You can't trust them. You know, they're not competent to serve on juries. Until 1919, women were automatically disqualified from serving on trial juries in England and Wales. And even after 1919, gender prejudice had the practical effect of keeping women from service as jurors, even when they were legally permitted to. And I want to give you some examples of how women juries were regarded. Here's an illustration of how ridiculous a woman jury would be. Look at the way they're dressed. I mean, can you take anybody like that seriously? Blackstone's beliefs were integrated, this is a 1902 cartoon, but Blackstone's beliefs were integrated into the legal systems of the U.S. and other English heritage jurisdictions. The notion of female jury service was resisted because of their supposed lack of intelligence, their emotional instability, and their need to tend to domestic duties. Women, it was contended, were too sensitive or too incompetent to be jurors. So here's an example of it. I don't know if you can read it. They're swayed by non-intellectual issues, right? I want to give you a brief timeline of suffrage and admission to jury service. You'll be astonished, I was, at how late these things changed. 1869, Wyoming Territory grants women the right to vote on the 10th of December, 1869. 1870, Utah Territory grants women the right to vote on the 12th of February, only about, 2 months later, thereabouts. Another illustration. This is how women and their children would be distractions to the serious deliberations of a jury. In 1870, remember, Wyoming Territory had given women the right to vote. In 1869, 1870, they're disenfranchised. Excuse me, 1871 they're disenfranchised basically. In 1870 they're removed from jury duty. 1879, the Supreme Court in Strauder versus West Virginia says that states have the right to bar women from juries. 1883, Washington Territory grants women the right to vote and the right to serve as jurors. 1887, the right to serve as jurors is taken away. 1887, Utah Territory, Congress disenfranchises Utah women by the 1887 Edmunds-Tucker Act, taking away their right to vote and any legal rights they have in that regard. 1895, Utah has a proposed state constitution, ratifies it, granting women the vote, but it's very much against, this seems so wrong for Utah, which is supposed to be a patriarchal and sexist state, right? But Utah grants women the vote very, very early, after the federal government has taken it away from Utah women, right? 1896, President Cleveland proclaims Utah a state, so Utah women can vote. Now here's an example of what juries would be like if men behaved like women. They're all so emotional, they just can't make a rational decision, right? 1898, the Utah State Legislature grants women the right to serve on juries. It's the first state in the Union to grant that right to women. 1898, this is pretty late. 1917 to 1919, Canada gives most women the right to vote in Canada. Native American women are excluded. 1918, the United Kingdom, women gain the right to vote, but only if they own sufficient property in their own names, or if they're university graduates, and if they're 30 years of age. 1920, the U.S. gives women national women's suffrage. Finally, 1928, the United Kingdom gives women full suffrage. 1942, though, Glasser versus the United States, the Supreme Court rules against defendants that all male juries are acceptable. 1942. And think of this film. Some of you may remember it. 1957, 12 Angry Men. Think about the title. This is about a jury, do you remember? Not 12 Angry Men and Women. 12 Angry Men. There are only men on this jury in 1957. Classic courtroom drama, and it still shows the sexist presuppositions. The last state in the Union to grant women the right to serve on juries was Mississippi. Maybe that's not a surprise. But 1968. In 1971, Switzerland gave women the right to vote in national elections. So it's an amazingly recent development in many countries. Can there be any serious question that I would ask as to why there are no women among the official 1830 witnesses to the Book of Mormon? How seriously would they have been taken? Well, most Latter-day Saints are aware of the testimonies of the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses to the Book of Mormon, and they're a pretty powerful thing. That's what this movie is going to be, to a large degree, about. Let me tell you an experience I had years ago. I was debating in a group of 5 Latter-day Saints against 5 evangelicals before the Evangelical Philosophical Society, and the national meeting was in Denver that year. And I remember at one point, William Lane Craig, that name will mean something to a few of you anyway. He's probably the leading evangelical philosopher in the United States. Very, very bright guy. I really do admire him. But he, at one point, said, look, the difference between Christianity and Mormonism, that's the way he put it, the difference between Christianity and Mormonism is that Christianity has 11 credible witnesses for its central event, the resurrection of Christ, and Mormonism had got nothing like that. Now, I was the one to respond to him, and I thought, oh, thank you. Thank you. You just painted a target on your back. Because, of course, not only do we have reputable witnesses, we have 11 of them, right? So that was fun. I could see as soon as he said that, Richard Mao, who was an evangelical, the head of Fuller Theological Seminary, who was the moderator for the debate, was sitting out in front of me, and he just looked at me and he said he knew that Craig had just put a target on his back, and I'm not one to pass it up. But these 11 men, impressive as they are, were not the only people besides Joseph Smith who had direct encounters with the gold plates. So there are the official witnesses, all male, as you see. All right. So I want to give you a few examples of the women whose testimonies we can call upon. I'll try to be quick here. First of all is a Mrs. Palmer. That's as well as we know her. She gives a rather naive account. She grew up not far from the family of Joseph and Lucy Mack Smith, and she speaks with simple eloquence of the prophet's character, but also the enmity that his claims aroused, even among people of otherwise goodwill. I'm quoting her now. My father owned a farm near that of the Smith family in New York. My parents were friends of the Smith family, which was one of the best in that locality. Honest, religious, and industrious, but poor. My father loved young Joseph Smith and often hired him to work with his boys. I was about 6 years old when he first came to our home. I remember going into the field on an afternoon to play in the corn rows while my brothers worked. When evening came, I was too tired to walk home and cried because my brothers refused to carry me. Joseph lifted me to his shoulder, and with his arm thrown across my feet to steady me and my arm about his neck, he carried me to our home. I remember the excitement stirred up among some of the people over Joseph Smith's first vision, and of hearing my father contend that it was only the sweet dream of a pure-minded boy. One of our church leaders came to my father to remonstrate against his allowing such close friendship between his family and the Smith boy, as he called him. My father defended his own position by saying that Joseph was the best help he had ever found. Not until Joseph had had a second vision, began to write a book, which drew many of the best and brightest people of the churches away, did my parents come to a realization of the fact that their friend, the churchman, had told them the truth. Then my family cut off their friendship for all of the Smiths. For all of the family followed Joseph. Even the father, intelligent man that he was, could not discern the evil he was helping to promote. My parents then lent all the aid they could in helping to crush Joseph Smith, but it was too late. He had run his course too long. He could not be put down. There was never a truer, purer, nobler boy than Joseph Smith before he was led away by superstition. That's an interesting kind of witness to the character of the family, as opposed to the rumors that circulated about them elsewhere. Martin Harris's first wife, Lucy Harris, is typically remembered among Latter-day Saints for her opposition to her husband's involvement with the Book of Mormon, and most dramatically as the chief suspect, the leading suspect in the case of the lost 116 manuscript pages. The story is a bit more complex than that, however. Lucy Harris was ill, and it's likely that her severe deafness left her insecure and even perhaps somewhat paranoid, so she deserves some charity. Moreover, her apparent fear that Palmyra's boycott of the Book of Mormon would lead to financial ruin for both her husband and herself was plainly not groundless. More to my point here, though, Lucy Mack Smith recalled that early in the process of recovering the Book of Mormon, Lucy Harris offered to help Joseph publish it, but, quote, only if I can get a witness that you do speak the truth. Joseph reminded her that only God can bestow such a witness, and Mrs. Harris went away highly displeased, quote unquote. But Lucy Smith's narrative goes on to recount that on the very next day, Mrs. Harris returned with a very different attitude. She said that a personage had appeared to her during the previous night, who told her that inasmuch as she had disputed the servant of the Lord, and said that his word was not to be believed, and asked him many improper questions, that she had done that which was not right in the sight of God. After which he said, behold, here are the plates, look upon them and believe. She then described the record very minutely. Lucy Harris gave Joseph $28, worth somewhat more than $750 in 2019, which appears to make her perhaps the very first donor toward the publication of the Book of Mormon. Maybe you haven't thought of her in that light, but there she is. Okay. Here's another one, Lucy Mack Smith. She's an important witness to the official witnesses. She had, for example, seen the chosen three leave for their encounter with the angel in the plates, and years later, she recalled the scene that ensued at their return. When they returned to the house, it was between 3 and 4 o'clock p.m. Mrs. Whitmer, Mr. Smith, and myself were sitting in a bedroom at the time. On coming in, Joseph threw himself down beside me and exclaimed, Father, Mother, you do not know how happy I am. The Lord has now caused the place to be shown to 3 more besides myself. They have seen an angel who has testified to them, and they will have to bear witness to the truth of what I have said. For now they know for themselves that I do not go about to deceive the people. And I feel as if I was relieved of a burden which was almost too heavy for me to bear. And it rejoices my soul that I'm no longer to be alone in the world. Upon this, she says, Martin Harris came in. He seemed almost overcome with joy and testified boldly to what he had both seen and heard. And so did David and Oliver, adding that no tongue could express the joy of their hearts and the greatness of the things which they had both seen and heard. Martin Harris particularly, she recalls in a variant account, seemed altogether unable to give vent to his feelings in words. He said, I have now seen an angel from heaven who has of a surety testified of the truth of all that I have heard concerning the record, and my eyes have beheld him. I have also looked upon the plates and handled them with my hands, and can testify of the same to the whole world. But I have received for myself a witness that words cannot express, that no tongue can describe. And I bless God in the sincerity of my soul that he had condescended to make me, even me, a witness of the greatness of his work and designs in behalf of the children of men. She says, Oliver and David also joined with him in solemn praises to God for his goodness and mercy. But Lucy Mack Smith had, with her 2 sons, Hiram and Samuel, joined the Presbyterian Church. By the way, the account was mentioned the other day of Joseph's response when he comes in from the first vision. You remember, she says, are you all right? Because he looks a bit tired. He says, oh, I'm well enough off. I've learned for myself that Presbyterianism isn't true. And I thought, that is such a teenage response, Are you all right? Yep, I'm okay. No expanding. With some of my kids at certain points, so where have you been? Somewhere. Who were you with? Oh, somebody. What were you doing? Something. Are you okay? He's just had the most colossal vision in human history, maybe. Yeah, I'm okay. But I've learned for myself that your church isn't true. So that just seems really, really authentic to me. So she's a member of the Presbyterian Church, and then, though, when the Book of Mormon is being printed, a delegation comes from the Presbyterian Church intending to persuade them to disavow the book. The spokesman for the group addressed the mother, but he received no satisfaction from Lucy Mack Smith. Deacon Beckwith, Lucy said, if you should stick my flesh full of faggots and even burn me at the stake, I would declare as long as God should give me breath that Joseph has got that record, and I know it to be true. The spokesman for the group turned his attention to Hiram, asking if he didn't think it possible that he'd been deceived. No, sir, Hiram responded, I do not. Finally, when Samuel, rather defiantly, younger brother, quoted a passage from Isaiah about blind watchmen and shepherds that cannot understand, the church leaders left. But they didn't leave the Smith family alone. They suspended them as members of the Presbyterian Church, and this is just the beginning of worse things. But here's the thing. Lucy Mack Smith is not simply operating on the basis of hearsay. She may herself have even viewed the plates uncovered. Henry Caswell, who's a normally unreliable witness, a British clergyman who was quite hostile, visited Nauvoo in 1842, and he quotes her as saying, "I have seen and handled the golden plates. They're about 8 inches long, about 6 wide. Some of them are sealed together and not to be opened. Some of them are loose. They are all connected by a hole which passes through a ring at the end of each plate and are covered with letters beautifully engraved." But his quotation is an outlier. No one else quotes her as saying that. There are no corroboration in other sources, so I'm inclined to agree with Larry Morris that he got it wrong. But that's not all there is. She definitely claims to have examined, that's her word, the Urim and Thummim, and, quote, found that it consisted of 2 smooth 3-cornered diamonds set in glass, and the glasses were set in silver bows, which were connected with each other in much the same way as old-fashioned spectacles. She also encountered the breastplate. It was wrapped in a thin muslin handkerchief, so thin that I could see the glistening metal and ascertain its proportions without any difficulty. It was concave on one side and convex on the other, and extended from the neck downwards as far as the center of the stomach of a man of extraordinary size. It had 4 straps of the same material for the purpose of fastening it to the breast, 2 of which ran back to go over the shoulders, and the other 2 were designed to fasten to the hips. They were just the width of 2 of my fingers, for I measured them, and they had holes in the ends of them to be convenient in fastening. That is, there's a real artifact there. She's not hallucinating. She's touching and holding a real, tangible object. Now, Emma Smith. Moroni told Joseph Smith to bring his oldest brother Alvin when the time came to recover the plates. But Alvin died young, at the age of only 25 in 1823. So Joseph was told at that point that a replacement would be given for Alvin. And he was told, "You will know her when you see her." Well, that person turns out to be Emma Hale. At midnight on the appointed date, Joseph and his new bride, Emma, arrived at the Hill Cumorah with Joseph Knight Sr.'s wagon. That's my claim to fame. That's an ancestor of mine. So we go back pretty early. We haven't done well since then, but we go back early. Joseph Knight Sr.'s wagon. Joseph goes off alone to retrieve the plates and returns with them under his coat. Now, when the plates arrive at the Hale home in Harmony, Pennsylvania, Emma serves as her husband's first scribe, taking dictation. And Joseph Smith III interviewed his mother in February 1879, 2 months before her death. She was 74. Before leaving, he read his transcript to her, and she confirmed its accuracy, so we can rely on this one. She was already at the point that she marries Joseph, an experienced school teacher, and she said that at the time the Book of Mormon was translated, her husband, quote, could neither write nor dictate a coherent and well-worded letter, let alone dictating a book like the Book of Mormon. During an interview with Edmund C. Briggs in 1856, she recalled that when Joseph was dictating to her and came to proper names, if I made a mistake in spelling, he would stop me and correct my spelling, although it was impossible for him to see how I was writing them down at the time. And again, in that interview with Joseph III, 2 months before her death, she testified to her eldest son, "The Book of Mormon is of divine authenticity. I have not the slightest doubt of it. I'm satisfied that no man could have dictated the writing of the manuscripts unless he was inspired. For when acting as a scribe, your father would dictate to me hour after hour, and when returning after meals or after interruptions, he would at once begin where he had left off." This has been quoted earlier, but it's worth repeating, without either seeing the manuscript or having any portion of it read to him. This was a usual thing for him to do. It would have been improbable that a learned man could do this, and for one so ignorant and unlearned as he was, it was simply impossible. But what about the plates themselves? Emma Smith moved them from place to place on the table as it was necessary on doing my housework, she says. At times, she had to, quote, lift and move the covered plates when she swept and dusted. Now, that doesn't sound to me like a spiritual experience or a vision. I've tried it on my wife. I've told several of you, when she complains, look at all those papers and books that are piling up by your side of the bed. I've told her, you're having a vision. You're just seeing them with your spiritual eyes. You should be grateful to be having this kind of revelation. They're not really there. This is very matter-of-fact stuff. She's moving the plates around, and she says they were heavy. Joseph III's questions and her answers. Question, had Joseph not a book or manuscript from which he read or dictated to you? Answer, he had neither manuscript nor book to read from. Question, could he not have had and you not know it? Answer, if he had had anything of the kind, he could not have concealed it from me. Question, are you sure that he had the plates at the time you were writing for him? Answer, the plates often lay on the table, without any attempt at concealment, wrapped in a small linen tablecloth, which I had given him to fold them in. I once felt of the plates as they thus lay on the table, tracing their outline and shape. They seemed to be pliable like thick paper and would rustle with a metallic sound when the edges were moved by the thumb, as one does sometimes thumb the edges of a book. Okay, so I've said before that she seems to be spending quality time with the plates. I mean, Joseph isn't there and she's feeling them through the cloth, and I've always wanted to ask her, come on, Emma. There's no one in the room. They're covered by a thin cloth. I know what I would have done and probably been stricken dead on the spot, but but I would have looked. And she says, I know he had the plates, and you can tell she feels, according to one description, she feels the ring. She feels the edges of the plates. She moves them, and she can feel the top plate scrape along the one below. She's really devoting some attention to this. So here you have a witness to the very matter of fact existence of a tangible object that is there. This is not in some sort of spiritual ecstasy. It's while cleaning the house, right? Which, for most of you, I'm willing to bet, is not spiritual ecstasy, okay? Now, on to his sister, of whom we could not get a good picture. Here she is when she's very, very old. This is Catherine Smith, or Catherine Smith Salisbury. Catherine, hefted the covered plates on several different occasions. She seems often to have emphasized what Chris Heimerdinger calls their physicality. She said they were very heavy, recalled her grandson, Herbert Salisbury. He also said that she told me while dusting up the room where the prophet had his study, she saw a package on the table containing the gold plates on which was engraved the story of the Book of Mormon. She said she hefted those plates and found them very heavy, like gold, and also rippled her fingers up the edge of the plates and felt that they were separate metal plates and heard the tinkle of sound that they'd made. Now, again, this may be a duplicate of the Emma story, we're not sure, but this is how his grandson remembers. If it's accurate, though, including the night on which the plates were first brought to the Smith home from Cumorah, Catherine was able to heft the plates on at least 3 distinct occasions, minimally 2. Other elements of her transmitted testimony are much more secure. In an article entitled "An Angel Told Him," Joseph Smith's aged sister tells about Moroni's talk. The 11th of April, 1895, Kansas City Times reported a speech given by Catherine Smith Salisbury about that same event. Mrs. Salisbury, the newspaper's correspondent told his readers, is a very old woman now, 83 years of age, but she claims to recall the time of the wonderful vision as vividly as though it were but yesterday. She would have been 10 years old when Moroni came. I can remember, she said, the time that this work commenced. My brother had the vision, that he saw the angel and talked with him. After he had had his first vision, he lay in bed one night studying what he had seen, and his room became light, and it grew lighter and lighter until an angel descended and stood at the side of his bed. He did not touch the floor, but he stood in the air. He was dressed in white raiment, of whiteness beyond anything Joseph had ever seen in his life, and had a girdle about his waist. He saw his hands and wrists, and they were pure and white, and he talked with him. Now, of all the accounts of the visitation, only Catherine mentions the angel's, quote, girdle, end quote. And only Catherine mentions that Joseph had been reflecting that evening on his earlier first vision. These facets of her narrative may well reflect what he himself told her, but never committed to writing. But very much as in Joseph's own account, she mentions the unparalleled character of the light in which the angel was enveloped. You'll recall how Joseph struggled to express the brightness and glory of the light he perceived, limited as he is to images taken in from his experience in a world that was still in the title of William Manchester's book about 14th century Europe, lit only by fire. He had no electric comparisons to make. Recalling the first visit of Moroni, Joseph said, the room was lighter than at noonday. He had on a loose robe of most exquisite whiteness. It was a whiteness beyond anything earthly I'd ever seen. Nor do I believe that any earthly thing could be made to appear so exceedingly white and brilliant. Not only was his robe exceedingly white, but his whole person was glorious beyond description, and his countenance truly like lightning. Or this account of his first vision, I saw a pillar of light exactly over my head above the brightness of the sun, which descended gradually until it fell upon me. When the light rested upon me, I saw 2 personages whose brightness and glory defy all description. He repeatedly says, I couldn't describe it. It was brighter than anything I can compare it to. And Catherine picks up that same idea, brighter than anything, any comparison that can be made. Now, William, who was about 12 and a half years old at that time, remembered that Moroni told Joseph to call his father's house together and communicate to them the visions he had received. Both Joseph's sister Catherine and his mother remember that Joseph was afraid that his father wouldn't believe him, and the angel assured him that his father would believe every word. And so it turned out. I obeyed, I returned to my father in the field and rehearsed the whole matter to him. He replied that it was of God. Now his sister Catherine, remembering the day more than 70 years later, recalls the sequence of events somewhat differently, having Joseph go to the house and ask his father and 2 brothers to come to him there. And very understandably, given the nature of the news, the discussion of the father and his 3 sons may have been a lengthy one that carried over from the harvest field into the house. Whatever the case, the 10-year-old girl was struck by the seriousness of the conversation that day. He went to the house and sent for father and my 2 brothers, and they came to the house and sat and talked quite a spell. I wondered at it. I was young, and I didn't know what they were talking about, because I knowed they were so busy with their harvesting. So this is important enough. They're taking a break from crucial, urgent work that has to be done. And Catherine remembered Joseph's arrival home in 1827 when she was 14, and that the plates were wrapped up in his frock. When he got to the door, he said, "Father, I've been followed. Look and see if you can see anyone." He then threw himself on the bed and fainted. And when he came to, he told us the circumstances. He had his thumb put out of place, and his arm was very lame. Her grandson, Catherine's grandson, Herbert Salisbury, remembered his grandmother's relating that when Joseph came in the house, he was completely out of breath. She took the plates from him and laid them on the table temporarily and helped revive him until he got breathing properly, and also examined his hand and treated it for the bruises on his knuckles. In striking the last mobber who was trying to take the plates, this is Lucy Mack Smith speaking, he dislocated his thumb, which, however, he did not notice until he came within sight of the house, when he threw himself down in the corner of the fence in order to recover his breath. As soon as he was able, he arose and came to the house. He was still altogether speechless from fright and the fatigue of running. And Mary Salisbury Hancock, Catherine's granddaughter, remembered Catherine relating the same episode, when Joseph, with the plates in his possession, had been chased by a mob. Hearing an unusual commotion outside, Catherine flew to the door, threw it open just as Joseph came rushing up, panting for breath. He thrust a bundle into her arms, and in a gasping voice whispered hoarsely, "Take these quickly and hide them." Then he disappeared into the darkness. Closing the door, Catherine ran hurriedly to the bedroom where she and Sophronia slept. Sophronia threw back the bedding, and Catherine put the bundle on the bed, quickly replacing the bedding. Both of them lay down on the bed and pretended to be asleep. The mob, failing to find Joseph outside, returned to the house to search, but they didn't disturb the girls since they appeared to be sleeping. Now, what kind of a witness is she? Is she credible? Illinois State Senator Orville Berry, not LDS in any sense, wrote a tribute to Catherine Smith Salisbury not long after her death, in her late 80s, on the 2nd of February, 1900. There resided in this country until her death Catherine Smith Salisbury, sister of the prophet. The writer knew her personally, has been in her house many times, and has grown up from boyhood days with her sons and grandsons. And the world would be wonderfully well off if all women were as good as Catherine Smith Salisbury. So her testimony should be taken very, very seriously. And now, another. You're familiar with this painting, which made its debut here last year. David Whitmer, one of the 3 witnesses, related that his mother, Mary Musselman Whitmer, saw the plates quite independently of anybody else and under the most matter-of-fact of circumstances. Again, not in a state of religious ecstasy or spiritual transport, but very matter-of-factly. The entire family of Peter Whitmer Sr. had become acquainted with Joseph Smith in 1828 through David, who was the 4th of 9 Whitmer children. Eventually, a substantial part of the translation of the Book of Mormon occurred at the Peter Whitmer farm near Fayette, New York, and later, of course, on April 6, 1830, the church was organized there. During that period, the place was a hive of activity. Joseph Smith and his wife Emma and Oliver Cowdery were boarding with the Whitmers, and other people, including curiosity seekers, were constantly coming and going. Much of the burden of coping with them fell upon Peter's wife, Mary. And some of you women will sympathize with this. My father and mother had a large family of their own, David later explained. The addition to it, therefore, of Joseph, his wife, Emma, and Oliver very greatly increased the toil and anxiety of my mother. Although she had never complained, she had sometimes felt that her labor was too much, or at least she was perhaps beginning to feel so. A granddaughter's account that was published by Royal Skousen, an interpreter, a while back, adds some very specific and very human detail to the story, relating that Mary Whitmer was irritated when Joseph and Oliver took breaks from translating and, quote, skated rocks on a pond. She thought they might just as well carry her a bucket of water or chop a bit of wood, and she was about to order them out of her house. Now, we know that he used to do that. Martin Harris talks about going down to the river when Joseph needed a break and skipping a stone on the river or on the lake. So it's very human. But, Mary Whitmer's question, well, why can't they just fetch me some water while they're doing this? It's understandable. So one day, though, probably in June 1829, when she's going to milk the cows in the family barn, where David happened to know the plates were concealed at the time, she met an old man, as she described him, who said to her, in David's account of the story, "You've been very faithful and diligent in your labors, but you're tired because of the increase of your toil. It is proper, therefore, that you should receive a witness, that your faith may be strengthened." Thereupon David said he showed her the plates, and this unexpected encounter, quote, "completely removed her feeling of being overwhelmed," said his son, "and nerved her up for her increased responsibilities." Afterwards, Mary was able to describe the plates in detail. John C. Whitmer, her grandson, reported that he himself had heard his grandmother tell of this event several times. He summarized her experience in more detailed fashion as follows. She met a stranger carrying something on his back that looked like a knapsack. At first she was a little afraid of him, but when he spoke to her in a kind, friendly tone and began to explain to her the nature of the work which was going on in her house, that is the translation of the Book of Mormon, she was filled with unexpressible joy and satisfaction. He then untied his knapsack and showed her a bundle of plates, which in size and appearance corresponded with the description subsequently given by the witnesses to the Book of Mormon. So he is actually the first witness, right? You notice that? The other witnesses come later. This strange person turned the leaves of the book of plates over, leaf after leaf, and also showed her the engravings upon them, after which he told her to be patient and faithful in bearing her burden a little longer, promising that if she would do so, she should be blessed, and her reward would be sure, if she proved faithful to the end. The personage then suddenly vanished with the plates, and where he went she could not tell. Now 5 of Mary Whitmer's sons became official witnesses to the Book of Mormon. Oliver Cowdery, one of the 3 witnesses and the principal scribe during its dictation, baptized her into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Seneca Lake on April 18, 1830, when the church was less than 2 weeks old. And he married her daughter, Elizabeth Ann, in December of 1832. The Whitmers gathered to Missouri with the Latter-day Saints, and there Mary died at 78 years of age in 1856, still a faithful believer in the divine origin of the gold plates and the book that had been translated from them. Another really important witness, and the witness of a woman. Here's what Royal Skousen has to say. The most interesting aspect of this story is that Mary Whitmer's difficulty with the household situation was more than just being tired from all the extra work. She was irritated by Joseph and Oliver's indifference to all the work she was doing, but they're not helping out and instead skipping rocks for relaxation, so she was about to order them out of her home. Thus, Moroni's intervention was perhaps more purposeful than we might have previously thought. Undoubtedly, many others exerted much effort on behalf of providing help to Joseph and Oliver, such as Emma Smith had just done in Harmony, Pennsylvania for the previous 3 months. Here, however, Moroni needed to deal with a more difficult situation, one that could have forced Joseph to find another place, and a secure one, to do the translating. Moroni and the Lord weren't in the habit of just showing the plates to people to encourage them to act as a support team for the work of the translation. But this was a crisis, and it had to be dealt with. And so Mary Whitmer has a vision or a showing of the plates. It's a remarkable thing. So here we have, although they're not among the official witnesses, we have a number of unofficial witnesses whose stories, I insist, must be told in this film that we're doing and in the products related to it that we're going to be producing, because they're in some ways just as important, and they are very tangible. You can't dismiss them as visionary experiences. Moving plates in order to clean the kitchen is not a visionary experience. Going out to milk the cows and encountering an old man who has a knapsack with golden plates in them is not a visionary experience. She didn't pray for hours to get into a state to experience that. She was going out to milk the cows, which my father, who had to do that when he was growing up on a farm in North Dakota, assured me was not a spiritual experience at all. In fact, I might close on a very unsolemn note. My father was concerned, growing up as a Lutheran boy in North Dakota, and having to milk cows. His mother, a Norwegian immigrant, had taught him that he was not to swear. But he said, when you're milking cows, and just when you get the pail full of milk and the cow sticks this incredibly filthy hoof in your milk pail, or the cow hits you in the face with its incredibly filthy tail, he says, you just have to swear. And so his concern was that his city cousins, who didn't have to milk cows, were going to go to heaven, and he was not. And it raised the question of divine justice in a really acute way for him. And so I'm just suggesting, based on what my father tells me about milking cows, and some of you have first-hand experience with this, that this is not, you don't go out to milk the cow in the mindset that it will bring you a divine vision. So anyway, these are, I think, extraordinarily important witnesses because they come from a different perspective. They're not official witnesses. They are unofficial witnesses who saw things and experienced things under very matter-of-fact, very tangible, sort of mundane situations. And that to me is evidentially powerful. Of course, we can't prove the Book of Mormon true, but my word, the witnesses are hard to get around. They seem to me, and there are probably about 20 of them or more, put them all together, who have these experiences with the plates and the angel and so on and so forth. They are very difficult to get around. Fawn Brodie could do no better than to say, if I remember right, Mary Whitmer's own experience, Joseph must have marveled at his ability to induce visions in others. Well, that's no kind of explanation. That's just brushing it aside, and she can't be brushed aside that easily, nor can the others. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Three questions. That's good. Oops, he's bringing another one. I'm not sure this is a question, it's a command. Imagine how long it would have taken the world to know of the resurrection if left to men. I better not comment on that one. I'm wondering if the man in that cartoon that the women were calling handsome was Ted Bundy. I have no answer for that one either. How can we work with millennials to better understand these concepts and disregard presentism? Well, I think part of the problem is that many people aren't hearing the story of the witnesses well. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had and how many interactions online I've had with people who have told me, well, when I realized that the witnesses never claimed to have actually seen the plates with their actual eyes or to have held them with their actual hands, then I just dismissed them. But in order to say that, you've got to ignore what the witnesses actually said. When Hiram Smith was quoted the other day as saying, I have only 2 eyes and only 2 hands. I held the plates with these hands. I saw them with these eyes. I mean, I don't know how much more clearly he could have said that. So I think one of the reasons I want to do this film is I want to tell this story as powerfully as I can, to get it right out there. People can still reject the testimony of the witnesses, but I don't want them to reject that testimony on the basis of a misunderstanding of it. I want them to know what it is they're rejecting. The witnesses did claim to hold the plates, the 8 did. They did claim to see them with their actual eyes. There's nothing metaphorical about this. David Whitmer pounding the table when a man says to him, well, maybe they were far away and you didn't see them very clearly. Young man, he bangs the table and says, the angel was closer to me than you are. I was not deceived. I know what I saw. It was no hallucination. Somehow we have not told that story as well as we should have, I think, in the last few decades. And so people are spiritualizing it, allegorizing it, dismissing it as imagination, and the witnesses refuse to be dismissed that way. So, okay. Why have the plates or the Urim and Thummim at all if they were never used by Joseph Smith to translate the Book of Mormon? I think partly because of their evidentiary value. They show, Joseph could have just been making this up, right? But they're these solid objects made out of gold, a gold alloy that are there. And you can't fantasize that into existence. And you have other people who can testify they were there. Also, speculative, but Royal Skousen, I think it's Royal, who suggested to me that Joseph, if he didn't have to have the plates in his presence to translate, nevertheless they had to be close. They could be covered in the next room or something like that, but they had to be close. And he sort of laughingly compared it to the idea of an iPhone hotspot or something like that. I don't know. I have no idea how the Lord does this, but it seems to me that would have reassured Joseph too. If you're ever wondering, am I hallucinating this? Well, then you remember you've got a 40 or 60 pound metal object in the next room, and you think, no, I'm not. This is real. This is as tangible as it gets. In fact, it's downright heavy. So you're not making it up. He knows he didn't make the plates. He couldn't have made the plates. So there was another one here that I didn't. Can you elaborate why the Queen of Sheba and Esther's stories are in the Bible despite the culture at the time? I have no idea why. Well, the Queen of Sheba, I think, was designed to illustrate the wide extent of Solomon's rule and his fame. That even Sheba, which is about as far away as you can go, that even she took him seriously. His empire was that big. And the story of Esther is to illustrate a moral point. By the way, I should probably tell you that I'm not sure that Esther is true history. It's the only book of the Bible, the Old Testament, that doesn't show up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there's some real problems with it, historically speaking. For one, the king of Iran at that time was forbidden to marry anybody who wasn't a member of certain Persian royal family or aristocratic family lines. So the idea that he married Esther is problematic. And even today, Jews don't take it very seriously on the whole. They have the festival of Purim, which is done with parties, and it's like Halloween. I mean, and they reenact the story of Haman and Mordecai and Esther and all this sort of thing. It's all for fun. It's the only book in the Old Testament where the word God doesn't appear. So there are a lot of reasons for wondering how seriously to take Esther. But it's a great little novella, and it's a fun story. I mean, the Jews are almost destroyed and then rescued, and all that sort of thing. It's a great account.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let Delana run you in.
Okay.